Good afternoon. I'm joined by Lieutenant Governor Polito and A&F Secretary Mike Heffernan to announce the filing of our administration's fiscal year 2023 budget proposal. The plan represents a fiscally responsible, balanced budget that makes important investments in our economy, schools, communities, all of which will position the Commonwealth for future success. Alongside this budget, we're also filing a comprehensive tax relief package. As I said in last night's State of the Commonwealth address, this proposal will help working families keep more of their hard-earned money to pay for needs like childcare and housing. It will also eliminate the income tax for hundreds of thousands of low-income taxpayers. The cost of just about everything is going up, and these tax breaks would help offset some of those costs for families. From a fiscal point of view, Massachusetts is in a very strong financial position and able to offer this tax relief while continuing to make big investments in our people, our schools, and our communities. That's due in large part to our careful management of state finances in collaboration with the legislature over the past 7 years. When we took office in 2015, the Commonwealth faced $1 billion structural deficit. But our commitment to budget discipline and strong partnerships with the legislature enabled us to balance the budget without relying on broad-based tax increases and eventually led to the budget surpluses we have now. Our responsible approach to balancing the budget continued throughout the past 2 years despite the additional challenges created by the pandemic. We leveraged both state and federal dollars to support a significant response that included everything from purchasing PPE to building up our vaccine and testing infrastructure to helping small businesses through some of the most difficult months. And that approach has paid off, and we actually ended last fiscal year with a surplus. Throughout our time in office, we've also more than quadrupled the size of the state's rainy day fund. With this latest budget proposal, we project to be able to grow the fund to an all-time high of $6.6 billion by the end of the next fiscal year, which is roughly a six-fold increase since we took office. This revenue picture means that Massachusetts can afford to let our residents, especially parents, low-income families, and seniors, keep more of their hard-earned dollars. This is especially important at this moment when people are facing rising costs due to inflation, supply chain issues, and other factors. The pandemic's also changed the way many people work, as many more have flexibility with respect to remote working, and our tax proposal will make Massachusetts more competitive with our peer states. Our tax proposal will allow nearly $700 million to remain in the hands of taxpayers on an annual basis. Specifically, it would double the maximum senior circuit breaker tax credit. This change would lower the tax burden for more than 100,000 low-income seniors. It would increase the cap on the rental tax deduction from $3,000 to $5,000. This would allow people who are renting to save approximately $77 million a year. It would help working families by doubling the dependent care credit, which would benefit more than 700,000 families in Massachusetts, and eliminating the income tax for thousands of low-income residents who still pay income taxes by establishing a different threshold to determine no tax status would benefit 234,000 taxpayers. Tell them, Margaret. And it would also propose to adjust the estate tax thresholds and short-term capital gains rates to make Massachusetts more competitive with other states, something a lot of our colleagues in the legislature on both sides of the aisle support. These changes would help people save money on housing and childcare costs and provide relief for some of our lowest income residents. And we certainly hope the legislature will take this opportunity to put more money into the hands of the pockets of these hardworking residents, many of whom were on the front lines over the past 2 years or had their lives disrupted by this pandemic. I do want to give a quick overview of some of the investments that are in this budget proposal. First, with respect to education, K-12 education, the budget makes big new investments in our K-12 schools to continue to fully fund the Student Opportunity Act, which will phase in substantial new resources over time. In total, the budget proposes $591 million in new money to fund the Student Opportunity Act, with the largest chunk of that being a $485 million increase in Chapter 70 funding. Another key investment related to education in this budget, we are proposing $156 million in financial and grants for college students, including $18 million to support an expansion of the Mass Grant Plus program. This expansion will allow all low-income in-state undergraduate students to attend public higher education without incurring debt for mandatory tuition or mandatory fees, the largest increase in financial aid in at least 20 years. The budget plan we're submitting today also includes significant new resources to modernize and expand our behavioral health system. For years, there's been a consensus that we need to prioritize behavioral health as much as we do physical health, and we've taken some important steps toward that goal over the past few years. We've increased spending on behavioral health by over $400 million over the past 5 years. And most recently, HHS Secretary Mary Lou Sutters and her team have been working with providers, advocates, and other stakeholders to develop a roadmap for behavioral health reform, which outlines tangible ways we can increase access to these services. Our FY23 budget includes $115 million to implement many key elements of this plan. It includes funding for a new centralized staffed behavioral health helpline available 24/7 to provide live support, clinical assessment, and connection to the right mental health and addiction treatment in real time. Readily available outpatient evaluation and treatment through primary care, supported by new reimbursement incentives, as well as a same-day evaluation and referral to treatment at designated community behavioral health centers throughout the Commonwealth. And better access points for emergency behavioral health support instead of emergency rooms. Later today, our administration will share more details about how these programs will work. We're excited about the prospect of putting these funds to work to make a difference for those people who need access to behavioral health services and can't find them. Our budget also continues our historic investments to combat the opioid epidemic, which has been exacerbated over the past 2 years by COVID. We've already nearly quadrupled funding to combat substance misuse since we took office, and today's budget proposal builds on that work with $543 million across multiple state agencies to support prevention, education, treatment, and recovery programs that address the addiction crisis. Our budget's also proposing significant investments to help keep people in their homes as we work to deploy new funds to create new housing across the Commonwealth. Our comprehensive Eviction Diversion initiative has done important work in this area throughout the pandemic, distributing more than $500 million in state and federal dollars to support renters and landlords and keep people in their homes. Going forward, we're proposing an $80 million increase in the RAFT Rental Assistance Program to allow the program to significantly expand the universe it serves, an estimated 15,000 households, up from typically what was more like 5,000 a year previously. In addition, the ARPA spending plan that I signed back in December includes about $600 million for housing, much of it to support new housing production through programs like the Commonwealth Builder Program, which increases access to home ownership opportunities in communities of color. We look forward to putting these dollars to work over the next year and to making additional investments to increase housing production along the way. COVID also created significant challenges to our economic landscape. Our Future of Work report that we published last summer forecasts that upwards of 300,000 people will have to change jobs to deal with the changing nature of the economy over the course of the next decade. In response to these changes, we're focused on making sure people have access to the skill-building programs that will enable them to enter the high-demand fields of today and tomorrow. The FY23 budget plan continues to fund the Career Technical Initiative, which was supported by us and funded by the legislature last year, which helps more students and adults access vocational and technical training programs at our vocational high schools. The $18 million proposal for the CTI program complements a total of $200 million in ARPA funding provided by the legislature for reemployment and job training programs that we'll be rolling out later this year. This budget, we're also proposing over $50 million to fund key recommendations made by the Black and Latino Advisory Commissions that keep our focus on equity when it comes to our job training and career pathway programs. We convened these groups several years ago to guide our efforts to support communities of color around Massachusetts, and their insights have been invaluable across a wide range of areas. That over $50 million investment includes $23 million to support higher education and career pathways for high school students and underserved communities through our early college innovation pathway and dual enrollment programs. That's a really significant increase in what we've spent historically on programs that have been enormously successful in helping young people collect college credits while they're still in high school for free. Let me close with this. Over the past 7 years, we focused on making investments in Massachusetts families and communities while carefully managing our revenues so we can avoid tax increases on our residents, especially working families. Over that time, we reduced the income tax back to 5%, doubled the earned income tax credit, and have kept our promise to cities and towns to increase local aid funding consistent with the growth in projected state revenues. Lieutenant Governor Polito will talk a little more about that in a moment. With this budget, we're sustaining that same approach. The tax proposal we're filing today reduces the burden on low-income residents and lets families keep more money in their pocket to pay for things like housing and childcare. We look forward to working with our colleagues in the legislature as the budget process moves forward and hope we can take action with them to provide this important tax relief in this year to our taxpayers. Before I close, I want to thank Secretary Heffernan and the assembled masses from A&F and the Budget Bureau for their hard work to prepare this budget and for their commitment to fiscally responsible budgeting throughout our time in office.